My friends, tonight we're going to finish this BMR-3M, and as it turns out there's not too much work left to be done because all the pre-weathering and other time-saving methods kinda did their job really well, meaning I'm left with less work than I originally anticipated. This is the last video of a 4-part series, so if you haven't seen the previous ones, make sure to check them out because I think they're very insightful. But anyway, let's start with the tracks because they're quite simple and straightforward. I wanted some loose strands of grass in the mud, so I turned them from a ball of dried seagrass, which already has a very nice natural color. I sprinkled them randomly here and there, nothing really special or complicated about it, and fixed them in place with ballast freeze from VMS. This approach is fairly easy, but the contact surface isn't large enough, so a lot of the grass is gonna fall off, as you'll see. I'll try to figure out something more durable next time, maybe a few drops of superglue or something. Anyway, continuing with more VMS stuff, I decided to finally give their pigments a try. I mixed my own color, which is pretty close match to the pre-dusting tone I already have on the model, and because I want a very thick and gritty matte paste, I added a lot of coarse pigment texture. Enamel binder will turn them into a color. It's not like an enamel thinner or pigment fixer which just suspends the pigment particles, this actually turns them into a real legit color, which is pretty magical actually. And because these tracks are metal and thus very sturdy, I just stippled the mixture in a thick layer. The coarse texture will become more evident once the binder starts to evaporate. The inner side was treated in a similar way, but I made sure to blend the excess with thinner, so the rubber pads will remain relatively clean. More texture can be added with speckling. Using this pigment mixture is a very effective way if you want to achieve thick and textured layers of mud, although I already added some before with Wilder's acrylic texture dirt, but this creates a finer result. Darker mud tone was added with Ammo's loose ground from the Splashes range. I stippled it first over the central part of the track without any blending because again, I'm all about that epic texture, and then on the sides. This way the track will look moist, but it's also gonna have a lot of subtle color variation. Once this was all done, I again polished the ice cleats, but because thick mud sticks pretty much to everything, I then carefully reapplied it here and there, so the shiny effect will be more irregular. And that's actually as far as track weathering goes. Well, not entirely, but now we need to take care of the wheels. It's gonna be the same technique like on the tracks, but the application has to be more precise if we don't want to cover them completely with mud. So I took care of each wheel separately, applying dry mud only on the outer edge. Just like with the tracks, or in fact the entire model, I already pre-weathered them with acrylic textured earth and an airbrush, so this process is faster and also easier. It's like refining a rough sketch of a painting. Same with the speckling, I only focused it on the outer edge so I wouldn't have to spend time wiping the excess from the hub in the center. And finally, some loose ground on the outside. Recessed wheels such as these usually collect most mud on the outer lip, and the recessed part can sometimes remain totally clean, which is kinda interesting. I wanted to make them look realistic but also aesthetically pleasing to some extent. So here's the result. Difference between the finished wheels and the others which are only treated with dry mud so far. Now I can assemble the running gear, like for good this time, not temporarily like in the previous episode. No glue is needed and the suspension is still workable, which in my case has no real benefit other than to look cool. Attaching the tracks was an uphill struggle like usual with these side-skirted tanks, but you just have to wiggle the track under the fender and the rest is gonna be fairly easy. I mean, it would be easy if I had more than just 2 hands, but since those tracks are metal, they won't fall apart even when I'm handling them like a barbarian or whatever. And also, a roll of toilet paper won't substitute for your missing third arm, but it sure can be helpful as a ghetto maintenance stand. The final touch was adding wet effects fluid over the heaviest layers of dark mud. It will give them a slightly wet appearance. Duh. I mean, that's the whole point of wet effects, but it's also gonna saturate the mud, so it's gonna turn even darker and thus the contrast will be more evident. This also works like a dream on the wheels, and the whole reason why I'm doing it now is because I don't have to waste time with sections which are gonna be hidden behind those rubber skirts. Now that I'm thinking about it, why didn't I just leave everything behind them unpainted? Huh. Anyway, the final touch was to make some muddy clumps of grass, so I stippled a few grass tufts with loose ground and stuck them into strategically selected places. The lower hull and running gear is now finished, and we can move on a little higher. Here's where all the pre-weathering starts to make a difference. At first I felt like I'll have to go over the entire model with the same paints like on every other model I did so far, but turns out the textured pre-dusting actually looks pretty good on its own. So I just ended up emphasizing it here and there, mainly on the side skirts, which are still pretty close to the tracks and thus they can collect lots of dust and also get splashed with water and mud. I'm using the same pigment and binder mixture like on the lower hull. The only difference is that now I didn't add the coarse pigment texture. So just pigments and binder if you want a smooth layer of dirt. Wet mud tones are perfect for distinguishing parts from one another, in this case the individual mud flap segments. It can also result in fairly realistic effects, as the water leaking from gaps between the side skirts would create stains exactly like this. Reactive armor can get splashed with dirty water as the vehicle passes through puddles, but here I was more restrained because it's easy to get carried away and then end up with a rather monotone result, because if there's too much of it, it's gonna look kinda bland. Moving on to the front section, which is gonna be the muddiest part of the upper hull because it gets splashed by the mine rollers, of course. There are actually pretty nice reference pictures for this on the internet. The weathering process was the same like on the running gear, the same speckling, same dark mud effects, same everything. What I appreciate about the VMS binder is that if you make a large batch of the pigment mixture, even if it dries, you can revive it the next day by simply adding more binder and mixing it with a paintbrush or something. You might be also asking why there's one mine roller already attached. Well, because I weathered it off screen and glued it in place so I could have a better idea about the mud effects and how would they land on the vehicle. I mean, sure, I had reference pictures, but sometimes it's better to have the model partially assembled and look at it from all directions. It'll give you a better idea about the overall result. So, here's what I did with the mine rollers. It was actually fairly simple and technically it's the same thing like before. Some blended mud tones on the side, some stippling on the contact surface because it will give us a very nice texture. It's actually basically the same thing like weathering tracks. The only difference is that here I had to create the polished cleats with graphite. Reference photos show that these rollers don't get polished too much even when they're rolling over hardpack or concrete. I don't know why. Reasons, I guess. But let's be honest, they look heavier with some metallic sheen, and also the cleats are now a nice visual detail which makes them look more interesting, and of course heavier. Now I was able to attach it to the model. The final weathering effects are gonna be easy to apply even when the model is assembled, and just like with the tracks, it was a real struggle to fit everything together without snapping something. But it was even harder because tracks are just tracks and mine rollers are... you know what I'm trying to say. The most fun part of the weathering is adding water effects. This is not the same thing like before when I brushed wet effects over the dark mud. Here I'm working with that magic mixture of mine. So, loose ground mixed with wet effects in equal amounts and a tiny amount of dark wash to make it darker than the surrounding mud. You'll get a nice semi-transparent dirty water mixture which works perfectly over acrylic or enamel earth tones, because these can get saturated like, let's say, dry pigments. I'll be honest, I didn't really like the model to this point. Everything looked kinda bland and low resolution, like I was watching it in 160p or something. But this is an easy way to make subtle mud effects look crispy and interesting. It can be blended with enamel thinner if that's your thing. It can be speckled if you're after random effects. It all depends on your needs. However, I'm still only working on the lower parts of the model, aka side skirts, fenders and the front plate. In fact, I didn't even touch the roof of the superstructure or the engine deck because they just didn't need any extra stuff. So yeah, I think this effect made the model pop and I was very satisfied with the results. It was a great time, and because I didn't want to get stuck in the same spot, I decided to wrap things up. So I assembled the rest of the model, all those sub-assemblies which I've been keeping separate the whole time, and then it was actually just about one final missing detail: smoke effect. Russian diesel engines, even these modern ones, tend to leak a lot of oil from the exhaust because of the increased tolerances in their bushings or whatever. There are many pre-made weathering products specifically designed for this effect, but I actually like to use a simple dark wash for grease and oil stains, and as it turns out it works really well for exhaust leaks as well. The muffler was then airbrushed with flat black Tamiya paint, which also made the streaking look smoother. I didn't want to go too heavy with this effect considering it's a relatively well-maintained vehicle, but it's alright, I guess. And last but not least, the final piece of the puzzle was to make the antennas. There are beautiful brass-turned antennas available as an aftermarket item, but I don't know, I was probably lazy to buy them or something, so I had to resort to stretch sprue like a true peasant OG. This was without a doubt the most frustrating and needlessly complicated part of the build, because they just wouldn't stay in place. Oh, and you must use super glue because modeling cement would completely dissolve them. But even then, super glue needs a few seconds to dry, and I didn't want to spray accelerator over the entire model as it can damage the paint. But after several attempts they finally decided to stay in place and I could paint them with a dark grey color. And this means the model is completely completed. Unfortunately, I won't be making a vignette for it because it's very long and just really big. And don't get me wrong, I actually tried different compositions, but the base would always have lots of empty space. It's kinda shame because I had a very nice idea in my mind, but I'll probably have to realize it some other time with another model or something. It doesn't matter, because what I wanted to tell you is pretty cool, and it's kinda mind-blowing, my friends. So I counted the amount of time spent on this model. I started spraying it on New Year's Eve, and I finished it on the 20th of January. I also managed to edit 4 videos during this time, so give or take -4 days, so I managed to paint and weather it in only 16 days. 16 days, which is absolutely mind-bending considering how much time I had to spend on all my previous works. And also, this is not a small or some overly simplified model either. I think all the pre-weathering, non-linear weathering and other fancy weatherings are kinda legit. And what's even cooler is that I already know how to improve them, which I'll try and show you on the next model. I'm actually kinda stoked to start working on the next one, which reminds me I should wrap this video up and go work on it. So thank you my friends for watching, I appreciate your support a lot. And if you like the model, leave me a like and a nice comment, or a dislike if you dislike it. And also let me know if you watched the whole 4-part series and what do you think about this approach and the whole time saving, being super efficient thing. And I also want to express my gratitude to my amazing patrons who are the official sponsors of this channel. And they're getting a lot of rewards in return, so if you're wondering what a Night Shift digital magazine subscription might look like, Patreon is the best place to go because I post there almost every day with updates from all my projects, 1 week early ad-free videos, full resolution studio photos like these, which you can download. There's 74 of them in total for this model, and there are also DMs so we can get in touch. Every pledge goes a very long way and I appreciate it a lot. And I think that's all I have for you this week. So again, thank you for watching my friends, stay safe and have fun, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you the next week. Cheers!